Hi, my name's Doug Dubay with Recasens USA, and recently I've been doing a series of little webinars about the solar properties of exterior textiles. And today I'd like to speak about some of the protective properties of textiles, and specifically the UPF factor or UPF properties of exterior textiles. I think we're all aware that the sun puts out all kinds of radiation or wavelengths, and some of them we're familiar with would be like the visible light and also the infrared, which you feel as heat. But another important type of radiation is UVA and UVB. And this kind of radiation can be very harmful to our skin, and it can cause premature aging to our skin, significant skin damage, and even skin cancer. So it's really important that we control the amount of sun that reaches our skin. Some can be good for you, but too much is not good at all. There's different ways to protect your skin, and you might have heard of the terms SPF and UPF. Now, SPF is probably the most well known, and that stands for sun protection factor. And it's really used to measure the protectiveness of these creams and lotions that are applied directly to the skin to block the sun's harmful rays, UVA and UVB in particular. The problem is that some of these lotions are only effective against UVA or UVB. Some of them have harmful chemicals that can be absorbed into the skin and have negative effects on our health. And then there's also the matter of application of these sun creams or blocks. And if the cream is applied too lightly or too thin, you won't get the kind of protection that they claim. Or if it rubs off, you don't get the protection that it claims. Or if you rely on it for too long of a period of time, uh, the lotion loses its effectiveness. Or you hold on to the bottle 2 or 3 years and then you use it and it's not as effective either. So there's a lot of variables in these creams. They have their place, but it's not always the best solution. And so another way to go about it is to block the sun before it gets to your skin. And that's where we get to the UPF, ultraviolet protection factor. And this method of calculating a level of protection was developed down in Australia, where the sun can be extremely strong. And what they did is came up with a way to specifically measure the UV protection that different fabrics provide. And what they have is a UPF rating, and that measures the amount of sun's radiation that's absorbed by the fabric before it reaches your skin, absorbed or reflected. And that gives you the UPF rating. And what's nice about this rating is that it takes a lot of things into account. So when they give a UPF rating to a fabric, it's sort of the worst case situation, the worst state that fabric's in, and still that's the rating they give you for the fabric. So they take into account the color of the fabric, uh, the weight, the weave, but they also weather the fabric over time and even measure the UPF or the sun blocking capability of the fabric when it's dry versus wet. And whatever the worst rating is that that fabric comes up with, that's the best rating they're going to give. And the higher the number, the more of the sun it's blocking out. So if you have like a UPF rating of 50, basically that means that if you were exposed to the sun for 50 minutes, your skin would actually receive only about 1 minute of sun's UVA and UVB radiation. So the higher the number, the more protection you're getting with that fabric. And I sort of touched on it, but some of the things that affect the UPF rating for a fabric has to do with the actual construction, weave, and weight of the fabric. The type of fiber that is being used is very important as well. And then, like I said, they take into account or test the fabric when it's wet and when it's dry. And then it seems intuitive, but also the fabric color makes a difference. And then some fabrics, after they've been aged, weathered, and washed and like that, lose some of their properties as well. So they take all these things into account when they're testing the fabric. The weave of the fabric really matters, and it just makes sense that if you've got a tighter weave with fewer holes or pinholes through it that the sun can get through, or a denser or weave, or it's a thicker fabric, then it's going to provide a higher level of protection and block those UVA and UVB rays of traveling through the fabric. Another thing is whether the fabric's wet or dry. Certain synthetic fabrics, it doesn't change the protection values of it much, but I did a little experiment here with some t-shirt fabric, just a white t-shirt. And you can see on the picture on the left here, the fabric's dry and there's a good level of opacity even with a white t-shirt. And you can't see what that bottle is, but once you get that fabric wet, you can see right through the fabric and see that bottle underneath. And what that means is that the sun's light and the damaging UVA and UVB rays are more easily transferred through that fabric as it becomes more translucent. So it's a huge difference with certain fabrics, whereas a lot of synthetics get wet, they're still just as opaque as they were when they were dry. And then it makes sense, but color matters as well. And it tends to be the darker colors tend to be more opaque, and just like less visible light gets through that fabric, less of the UVA and UVB comes through the fabric as well. So when you're looking for a fabric to protect you outdoors, the main things you should be looking for is a fabric that's going to hold up over time, that through repeated exposure to the sun, washings, weathering over time, it's going to hold up and maintain its density of weave, its depth of color. Make sure that fabric's tightly woven so that light can't get through. All things being equal, it's better to go with a darker fabric than a lighter. And when a textile company is intent on one of the main benefits of its fabric being protection of people from the sun, oftentimes they'll go to a certified lab and get their fabric tested independently and get a UPF rating like the one you see on this screen. And the higher the rating, the more protection it's providing to you, whether it's on clothing that's to protect you or some sort of sun shading device. So look for that. And many solution dyed acrylic awning fabrics, really most of them have a UPF rating of 80 or better, which says they're blocking very close to 100% of the UVA and UVB rays and providing you an excellent level of protection. And this rating, what it does is it gives the rating of the sun passing through the fabric. However, when you're talking about sun shading devices, there is a circumstance where the protection you receive might be less than what that fabric claims, because you also have to take into account reflected light. So looking at these two pictures, you can see on the left, you have an umbrella that's providing very good protection to that chair there. But since it's on a white sand beach, there's a lot of reflected light. And so you still are getting exposure through reflection of all kinds of rays. You'll feel the heat. Of course, you see the light, but also UVA and B are being reflected up there as well. Now, if you're in a situation like on the right, where you've got a nice deep patio, a darker fabric, and a darker surroundings, you'll have much better protection, and your actual protection will be much closer to the rating of the fabric itself. So keep that in mind when you're going out in the open, that the reflected light is another factor you need to take into account. Well, I hope this little webinar was helpful to you. And if you have any questions, feel free to give us a call. Thanks for your attention.